I'm Joe Lample. When I created Growing a Greener World, I had one goal: to tell stories of everyday people, innovators, entrepreneurs, forward-thinking leaders who are all, in ways both big and small, dedicated to organic gardening and farming, lightening our footprint, conserving vital resources, protecting natural habitats, making a tangible difference for us all. They're real, they're passionate, they're all around us. They're the game changers who are literally growing a greener world and inspiring the rest of us to do the same. Growing a greener world, it's more than a movement, it's our mission. This is an exciting day because it's the start of a brand new year in the garden at Growing a Greener World. And like every year, I have great expectations for what takes place inside that fence. But this year, we're doing something we've never done before. We're bringing you along for the entire growing season. From right now in mid-March all the way through October, you'll be there for the good, the bad, the successes and challenges, and of course, that first ripe tomato of the season. We'll teach you some awesome DIY projects, show you how to make the ultimate tomato cage, and make you a better gardener in the process. And it's all ahead, and it starts right now on Growing a Greener World. Gardening is a year-round endeavor, but it doesn't follow a calendar with strict start and stop times. Work on this year's garden started last year, and even long before that, dating back to when I designed the garden, cleared the land, created raised beds, added fencing to enclose and protect my crops, and built the soil, making improvements and additions season after season to eventually get me to the soil I'll plant in this season. Now, before I ever put new plants in the ground, I always take time to improve the soil, and the best soil amendment for that is compost. Now, I make my own, but you can buy it. But one thing that you could use if you wanted to with your compost is a device like this that really screens it, and it's really easy to make. In fact, you don't even need instructions for this. Just get some treated wood, 2x4s work well, and some hardware cloth and staple it to the bottom and then screw in the sides. But this will prevent those big chunks from going into the compost as well. And it allows you to just have the ultra fine compost. Now, if you want to go super fine, actually this is ultra fine right here, is one with hardware cloth that has smaller squares. So it's a personal preference because I just let it break down naturally in the beds. But if you're inclined to want really fine compost, use a smaller square and let it sift through, and then it'll screen out these larger pieces. And even though composting is a critical step in prepping the beds for new plants, it's never really a blank slate in the garden. There are still some of last season's crops to deal with, and sometimes that means just working around them. By the way, for you savvy gardeners out there, you might have noticed that some of these plants are about to bolt. Now, this means they're past their prime, not as good as they used to be to eat, although they are still edible. But as they go to flower, that's great for my pollinator friends around here because this time of year there's not as many food choices. So by making this available, they have one more thing to eat. So I'll leave it here until I need the space. And I know I don't need the space yet because I have a master plan for all of this year's crops. That's a hugely important step in any garden because going out and buying cartloads of whatever seedlings catch your eye or randomly ordering dozens of seed packets rarely works, at least not for me. No, my best gardens always come from sitting down with pencil and paper and figuring out what's going on where, how much to plant, when to plant it, and where it's coming from. Some I may grow myself from seeds over winter, some I buy from the nursery, some are seeds obtained from faraway sources, and some come from a lot closer to home, like my neighbor Phil. Come on in.
Yes.
Got it? Great.
Yeah,
You got some chard here. These are for me, huh?
Those are for you, yes.
You're a good man.
Take a look at these. Look at the roots on this plant. coming out of the ground. Look at the amazing root that's there, ready to go.
Oh my God, that is full, nice deep. These are going to hit the ground running.
They are going to hit the ground running.
Now when you put yours in, do you do anything with the root or do you just drop it straight in? Do you do anything to break this up?
I do a lot of heavy spading like you're doing here,
Yeah.
and work up the soil so it's really loose, and I just set it in.
Every gardener I know has a certain method to their planting process, and that's okay. There's no one right way to go about it, and what works for you may not necessarily be someone else's cup of field peas. But along the way, we've all picked up little tips and tricks that we've incorporated into our gardening routine. And I'm about to show you one of my all-time favorites. Some people call this livestock panel. I call it a planting grid. But the fact of the matter is, it's the same thing. You get them at the tractor and farm supply stores, and they come in lengths of 16 feet. But the beauty of this, once you get it home and with a pair of bolt cutters, cut it to size for any bed, and then you have the perfect template for spacing out your seedlings. Now, I wasn't entirely sure it would work the first time it occurred to me, but one of the gardening tasks I like least is spacing out my plants in even rows and all at appropriate widths. Yes, it's important, but it can also be really tedious and extremely time-consuming. But after just a little trial and error, using these livestock panels as planting templates turned out to be one of the best ideas I've ever had. It's a huge time saver, and for a guy who's more than a little obsessive about how his garden looks, the grids are a foolproof way to achieve planting perfection. So this bed is where I'll plant my lettuce, and it's actually a great location because it gets some shade, and lettuce is one of those edibles that actually prefers some shade. Now, here's an application where I've got some plants already in the bed, and if I use a full planting grid, I would crush these plants, and I certainly don't want to do that. So the simple solution is to take a grid and cut it down into smaller pieces and just put them into place and plant into it. That way you have perfect spacing without disturbing the plants on either end. But those livestock panels are more than just one-time spacing tools. I've found several ways to make them versatile multitaskers at the garden farm. Another application of the livestock panel / planting grid that I love is to use them as trellises, and I use them for my peas all the time. I have one panel that I cut to size to fit the bed, but I also made one other modification, and that is to cut the 2 horizontal pieces from the very bottom. Now that frees these up to serve as stakes that I can push into the soil to secure the panel in the bed. It's that simple, and then I lean it slightly towards the center. Then I have another panel that matches the size exactly, and I bring that to the other side. I line them up, push it in, and it's really that easy. Now, if I wanted extra security, I could put those zip ties in here, but I never do, and they never fall apart. And now all I have to do is use these vertical slats as my planting guide, and I'll put some peas against each one. To be honest, if I had to think about how to support peas every time I wanted to grow them, twice a year in both spring and fall, I probably wouldn't even bother to plant them at all. But with the store-bought panels as my instant trellises, it takes me less than 60 seconds to prep one of my favorite crops for the entire growing season. Well, it's been exactly 4 weeks since I planted all those tiny, cool season seedlings, and everything is jumping out of the bed, like my beets and chard, and there's the broccoli and cabbage and peas. But it's no surprise. I have amazing soil and awesome homemade compost and full sun, all the conditions plants need to thrive. But now we're into mid-April. We've got the green light to plant all those classic crops of summer because there's no more risk of a late season frost. But I'm out of room. So some of these plants have to go, so I can make room for my homegrown tomatoes. So now that you have compost ready to go into your garden, the question is, how much do you use and how do you apply it? Well, here's the bad news, good news part of this story. The bad news is you can never seem to make as much as you'd like to use. Even for me at the garden farm, I always want to have more than I do, and I make a lot of compost. But the good news is a little bit goes a long way. For example, in this bed, it's 4 feet wide and 12 feet long. And all I'm trying to do is add about 1 inch to the surface and then turn it in to about 4 to 6 inches. Now, why not more? Well, the primary roots are closer to the top, and if I worked it down even deeper, I would lose some of the benefit of that compost because it's below where those roots are, right? So if I keep it closer to the surface, that's where the roots are going to really be able to utilize it and take it up. So what I'm going to do right now is spread about 1 inch across the surface, turn it in with my fork, and then I'm ready to plant. The tomato. It's the first vegetable many gardeners plant, the only vegetable some gardeners plant, and the favorite vegetable of seemingly everybody, even though it's technically a fruit. And wherever I go around the country, the #1 topic I'm asked about from people I meet is how to get the best results when growing tomatoes. There are several methods for planting tomatoes with success. Now, most of the time, people will get their tomato plant home and put it in the ground at the level that it was growing in the container, and that is perfectly fine. But there's another school of thought, and that is to plant your tomatoes extra deep, and you can get away with it because tomatoes have these tiny white fibers on the stem. Those will become roots when they come in contact with the soil. And the thinking is, the more roots in contact with the soil, the more vigorous the plant because they can take up more water and nutrients. And the fact is, those plants do very well. Now there's a third option. If you happen to have a plant that's very tall and leggy and just won't stand up on its own, then you can plant it sideways and bury the stem. Again, those tiny white fibers will become roots, the top will turn towards the sun, and that plant will be incredibly vigorous. So we're going to try one of each and see how it goes through the season. Now the final step in the planting process with just about anything, and especially tomatoes, is to add mulch. Now why did I say especially tomatoes? Well, they are particularly susceptible to all kinds of diseases, including some that can be transferred from the soil on up into the foliage when rain splashes and transfers that. So the mulch acts as a protective layer to prevent that from happening. So once your soil is prepared, it doesn't take long to get those tomatoes planted, watered, and mulched and ready to go. And one other important feature of the mulch, it helps to hold in that valuable moisture that these plants are going to need, especially through the hot, dry summer months. So I just planted tomatoes, my first ones, yesterday, and I have a few more beds to go. We'll have about 24 to 26 by the time it's all finished. And I'll be adding some new varieties today and next week, and then they'll go in. But it's an exciting time of year to put those little plants in the ground and to know that within 8 weeks I'll probably be harvesting fruit and the plants will be spilling over the tops of the cages, as well as everything else that's growing in this garden. The key to enjoying those first ripe off the vine tomatoes of the summer as soon as possible is to get them in the ground just after the risk of spring frost has passed. Now I plant mostly heirloom varieties. They are my favorite to eat because of the wide variety of flavors and colors, and I just love the unique story behind how each one came to be, how it was passed down through the generations because of a special trait or unusual quality that family members wanted to preserve. I spend a lot of time during my solo hours in the garden thinking about those stories. It's like therapy for me, and it makes me feel like I'm somehow in tune with those gardeners of yesteryear to know that the very same tomato I'm growing today is there because someone cared enough about that particular variety to keep it going. If you've never tried growing heirlooms, I'd encourage you to save a little room in your next garden for 1 or 2 varieties with some historical significance. You can find a list of some of my favorites on our website, as well as where to go to get them. The address is the same as our show name. It's growingagreenerworld.com. You never know, you just might find your new favorite plant. Of all the plants that I grow in my edible garden, I have to admit my favorite by far are tomatoes. Now, the one thing I don't love though is the taming of them. You know, when they get kind of big and you're trying to keep them under wraps and supported and from taking over your garden. And yes, I've tried just about every support you can possibly buy, retail and wholesale, but nothing has quite met my standards of satisfaction for how they work and how they look in the garden. That is, until now. So my aha moment came when I was thinking about other uses for those really versatile livestock panels that you get at the tractor and farm supply stores. They cost about $20 and they're 16 feet long and about 4 feet wide, but you can use them for so many things in the garden. And so I said, well, why not use them for support for my tomatoes, right? So I came up with a plan, and the plan is this. One panel makes one support, there's two pieces there, and the best part is there's no waste at all because the excess pieces that I cut away, they can go into other parts of the garden or used for other things. So here's the plan that you can make these yourself. You just need two things to make these. One livestock panel and a pair of bolt cutters that you can find at any hardware or box store. These cost me about $22 and well worth it. And go ahead and spend a few extra dollars to get the large size. It makes cutting much easier. Using livestock panels that have openings that are 6 inches apart, count across the width so that you have 6 squares and cut away the rest, all the way down the panel. With the width of the long panel now reduced to 6 squares, I count down from one end 9 squares and cut all the way across, just above the horizontal piece at the bottom of this 9th square. I then repeat that step, starting from the top of the other end of the panel. Once you cut across the piece, you now have 3 remaining pieces. The middle piece is now a nice sized piece of fencing that can be used for a small teepee, connected to other pieces or whatever, but the size makes them very versatile in and around the garden. The 2 remaining pieces are what will make up your cage support. For each panel, cut away the horizontal pieces between the vertical pieces on the first row up from the bottom. This leaves long spikes to anchor the panels into the soil. Place each section under a piece of straight lumber, at least as long as the panel, so that 3 squares are showing against the straight edge of the lumber, and bend it up towards you until you get a 90-degree angle. Now it's simply a matter of inserting them into the garden bed around each plant, so that when both panels are installed, they form a square cage with the plant centered in the middle. A final step to make it tidy is to secure each piece together with these small cable ties. That's all there is to it. These cages are super sturdy, plenty tall enough, and just wide enough so as not to crowd the plant, but still leave ample room for other cages in the bed. At the end of the season, I'll be able to stack these in a neat pile until next time, and for many years after that. Considering all the years of use I'll get from each cage, the upfront cost of the livestock panel, I think, is a very good investment. So this is that time of year where I'm always a little bit struggling with the bittersweet aspect of it. This bed right here is full of broccoli and it's headed up beautifully, but it could stand another week or so in the ground to really get big. But I need that space for the remaining tomato plants that are still in the pot. So I'm faced with the dilemma of cutting out all of these plants and making the room. I have another bed just like this I need for peppers, so, you know, oh well, somebody's going to be eating a lot of broccoli in the next week or so. Well, it's May 10th and I have just a few more tomatoes to plant, Craig LaHoulier's dwarf varieties. Those are going to go into a dedicated bed. along with a lot of peppers. And the earliest tomatoes went in 3 weeks ago, and that's really the most exciting time of the summer garden. When you plant those tomatoes, and then of course you get the cages in, that's the icing on the cake for me. But it's also that time where you should have the least amount of problems, because all those bad things that set into a summer garden haven't happened yet. But in my case, I've already noticed some problems. And it's called early blight, and it's brown spots on the leaves. Now, you should always inspect your plants before you bring them home to make sure that doesn't come into the garden, but a lot of times it's hard to see, and that's the case with me. It obviously got into my garden, and it started showing itself after I planted them. Gardening really is the ultimate hands-on hobby, especially when you're trying to track down the cause of a problem with one or more of your plants. A visit or even two to the garden every single day is not too often by any means, as things can often change just that quickly. Another mystery appeared early in the growing season on just 2 of my 32 tomato plants. They were showing very strange yellow foliage in the new growth only, but no other plants around them were showing similar symptoms, and the 2 affected plants were in separate beds and different varieties, so nothing in common that I could link them to. It's sometimes like playing detective, looking for clues and eliminating suspects one by one. In the case of the yellow foliage, the culprit turned out to be glyphosate. It's a common herbicide found in products like Roundup, but for an organic gardener like me, it was perhaps the most frustrating finding possible. Where could that have come from? Well, most people don't realize just how far traces of herbicide can drift once it's airborne. In my case, it apparently came from a neighboring farm. It makes sense though. They're not that far beyond the fence, and they do use that herbicide around their farm. Lucky for me, the damage wasn't severe, and my neighbor was happy to work with me ahead of future spraying. I dodged a bullet and got a good reminder of why staying vigilant in the garden is so important. At this time of the year, the most important thing is to make sure that your plants are healthy, and the main way you do that is to make sure they're hydrated. Now, we have soaker hoses and drip irrigations connected to each of these beds under all the plants. Whether you can hand water or you're gone all the time, you've got to think about what you're going to do to keep these plants well watered. In our case, those soaker hoses connected to automatic, portable drip irrigation and timers makes all the difference and takes the worry out of whether these plants get the water they need. When it comes to harvesting tomatoes, I always try to time it for the 4th of July weekend. It just seems like the perfect time. And I almost got there. I'm about a week late. So this is July 11th, but I have very healthy tomato plants. And this bed in particular, you might remember when I first planted it. The first plant went into the ground at the normal level, like it was growing in the pot. But I also demonstrated what happens when you grow it extra deep and planted it all the way up to the top 2 nodes of the plant. And it's doing fine. The third plant went in sideways, so all the roots would grow out the stem just below the surface. And it's doing fantastic, lots of tomatoes there. And this is the one I planted just in between, not too deep, not too shallow. And it's the one that has the most tomatoes ready to harvest right now. It's also shorter than the others, but that's because it has more sun exposure, it doesn't need to stretch as much, and it's been very prolific. So I'm ready to harvest and have those first tomatoes off the vine. With the first tomatoes off the vine and into the kitchen, well, that signals the unofficial halfway mark of the year in the life of the garden farm. And for us, it's a chance to reap the fruits of our labor and the sweet taste of success, literally. Now for some, this is what it's all about. It's the beginning of the end of a fast and furious growing season. Now for us, it's just a short break because we have another half year in the garden, lots of work left to do, plants to nurture, and a lot of plants that aren't even in the ground yet. But it's just part of that ongoing cycle of life in the garden. I'm Joe Lample. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you back here next time for more Growing a Greener World. I'm Joe Lample. When I created Growing a Greener World, I had one goal: to tell stories of everyday people, innovators, entrepreneurs, forward-thinking leaders who are all, in ways both big and small, dedicated to organic gardening and farming, lightening our footprint, conserving vital resources, protecting natural habitats, making a tangible difference for us all. They're real, they're passionate, they're all around us. They're the game changers who are literally growing a greener world and inspiring the rest of us to do the same. Growing a greener world, it's more than a movement, it's our mission. Good morning on a fall Saturday. It's in the 40s here. The fall garden is planted. 6 weeks ago, I ripped everything out from what was remaining from my summer crops, improved the soil, and planted all my seedlings. I didn't start anything from seed this year except the spinach, which just is coming on now. But everything in this garden is exploding out of the beds. I attribute that to really awesome soil, lots of compost. That's my thing, you know that. But the garden is looking great. The cabbage is heading up, the mustard is super spicy, the peas are potting. Everything is really great, and I love the fall time of year for a vegetable garden. And a lot of people, I think, overlook that. They think when summer is over, so is the gardening season, and that is so not the truth. It's all about fall today as we document a year in the life of the garden farm at Growing a Greener World. Things started back in March. Now, before I ever put new plants in the ground, I always take time to improve the soil, and the best soil amendment for that is compost. And I put my top gardening secret weapon to use. Some people call this livestock panel. I call it a planting grid. And with a pair of bolt cutters, cut it to size for any bed, and then you have the perfect template for spacing out your seedlings. But these things are like Swiss Army knives in that they do more than one job over the course of the growing year. I cut them to smaller sizes to use as trellises for climbers, like peas, and even bend them into super sturdy cages for my favorite summer crop of all. So I just planted tomatoes, my first ones, yesterday, and I have a few more beds to go. The summer gardening season wasn't without some challenges and surprises, especially with a few of my heirloom tomatoes. But in my case, I've already noticed some problems. It's called early blight, and it's brown spots on the leaves or along the margins. My tomatoes and I persevered, though, with an all-organic approach that produced an incredible summer harvest. But we're not done yet, because here on the garden farm, growing vegetables is a year-round sport. So if this were a football game, we would be well into the third quarter right now. And looking back on the action so far, it's been a tough game. It's me against Mother Nature, and Mother Nature is always the predicted winner. Anybody that plays Mother Nature is the underdog, and it's no exception here. But I love the challenge, and right now it's a pretty close game. But it's been the hardest year in the garden that I can remember for a couple reasons. First of all, super, super hot. Atlanta, the southeast area, is always hot and humid, but this year was exceptional. It was always in the mid-90s every day with little rain. Now, that works in a good way and a bad way. If you're growing tomatoes and plants that are very susceptible to disease, that extra moisture can be a problem, and we didn't have that, and that did help my tomato crop. On the other hand, you had to water a lot more, but I'm looking around. It's kind of that time where you call a timeout, you clean up, you assess the damage, and you get a game plan to finish it out. And that's what we're doing. But right now we're bringing in the new team, the fresh crop, the fall crops. And I'm really looking forward to that. Right now I'm taking out the beans, pulling up the soaker hoses, improving the soil, prepping the beds, and then I'll put something else new in here like spinach or lettuce. Got a lot of things going in, but You know, this is one of those few weekends during the year that there is a lot of intensive work to renew and replenish the beds and get everything sorted out for planting. It's kind of exciting, it's very tiring, but it's just kind of a new chapter, and by the end of summer you're ready for a new chapter. But for many gardeners, there may not be a next chapter at all, and that's by design. Maybe your climate isn't really conducive to winter gardening. It could be that you're personally not interested in continuing the time commitment and maintenance schedule through the colder months. Or perhaps your family simply doesn't get as excited about cool season crops like beets and kale as they do about summer tomatoes and beans. Whatever the reason, if your vegetable garden isn't a four-season endeavor, there's no need to pull out plants that are still performing and producing fruit. In many cases, simply trimming these plants back at the end of the summer will get you beautiful new growth and another late harvest, if you can beat that sometimes unpredictable first frost. But for year-rounders like me, it's like a treasure hunt to salvage every last veggie that I can find as the summer crops come out. Still lots of great beans here. So as I pull out, it looks like I've got another job, and that's to harvest all the rest of the beans. Can't let those go to waste. So the other frustrating thing about pulling productive plants out of the garden before they're really finished is that you just hate to do that. I mean, they're still working, and I'm saying I need the room and you need to go. And I don't know, call me crazy, I just feel a little weird about that. But you have to be ruthless because I need this space. But you know, this plant right here, although it's not pretty, a few more weeks I'll have many more red ripe tomatoes, but timing is critical, so it's gonna be fried green tomato time, I guess. Not letting your harvested crops go to waste can be a constant struggle for gardeners. But too much edible food is a good problem to have because that means your plants are performing well. And there's always a solution. Try new recipes to use up a bumper crop. Give away veggies to friends, neighbors, and coworkers. Donate surplus to a local food bank or pantry. There's always a way to preserve the harvest. And no one knows more of those ways than our own master food preserver, Teresa Lowe.
As gardeners, I think we all have those moments when the entire garden ripens all at once and we don't have time to can it or cook with it. Well, today I'm going to show you how to preserve all of your summer flavors, and it doesn't take a lot of time and you don't even need any special equipment. I'm talking about using your freezer. And what's great about the freezer is that it preserves the flavor and the nutrition. So we're going to learn some of the tricks, and we're going to start with tomatoes. Now, tomatoes happen to be one of the easiest things to freeze, and that's because you literally can just pop it into the freezer. You don't have to peel it or core it. When it defrosts, it comes out kind of as a stewed tomato consistency. It's a little bit soft, and at this point, you can just peel off the skin and you can core it if you need to. And it works in stews and soups and chili, anything where a cooked tomato would be used, but it still has all of that summer fresh picked flavor. There's a couple different ways that you can package up your tomatoes for the freezer, and the easiest is just to use freezer bags and press out as much air as possible. Air is actually the enemy of anything frozen because it kind of deteriorates the flavor and the texture. But if you don't want to have your food next to plastic in the freezer, the best thing to use are your canning jars. Now, they have to be modern jars. You don't want to use anything vintage because the glass will break. And you don't want to use like an old mayonnaise jar or sauce jar. It has to be a canning jar because they're tempered glass and they're made to withstand high temperatures and low temperatures. Also, the newer canning jars have an actual mark on them for where you stop when you're filling it for the freezer. And this is because the food expands when it freezes, and it needs to have room so that it won't press against the top or break the glass. And I also recommend that you use a jar with straight sides, not the kind that come in at the top. Because this food does expand when it freezes, if it comes in at the top, the food will push on that and can break your jar. Now, filling this jar for tomatoes could not be easier. Basically, if it's a small tomato, you just put it in the jar. But if it's a larger tomato like this, you can cut it in half or in quarters, and I just try to squish in as many as I can. They're going to come out soft anyway, and you want to try and fill the spaces so you don't have any air. So in this case, the jar still has a lot of air pockets. You could actually fill it with water, but I want to pack as much flavor in here as I can. So I like to use tomato juice. You can actually squeeze a tomato, or you can use a canned tomato juice, anything that will fill those voids. When you're filling it with your liquid, make sure you stop at that fill line so that it has room to expand. And then you just put on your lid and your ring. Label this and use it within 6 months. Now, it's not that it suddenly goes bad at 6 months. It's just that right at that point, you really start losing quality very rapidly. So try to use it within 6 months for best quality. Now, what about berries? Strawberries, blackberries, blueberries? Well, berries are also very easy. All you do is place them on a cookie sheet and freeze them for a couple hours first before you put them into the container. And that's so that later, if you just want to reach in and grab a handful for a smoothie or for your pancake batter, you don't have to defrost the entire container. Also, berries tend to pack in really well, and you don't have to add any liquid to eliminate any air. Berries are also wonderful for freezing and later making your jams and jellies. It's a really nice time-saving tip. Well, that brings us to zucchini. And I don't think that there is a gardener alive who hasn't grown too much of this vegetable. All vegetables are normally blanched before they're frozen because they have an enzyme on the outside that can make them get soft and mushy, and blanching just slows down the process. But today we're looking at ways to save time. And if you're going to be using this zucchini to make zucchini bread or muffins or put it into a cake to add moisture, then you don't have to blanch it because you don't care if it gets soft and mushy. So what I do when I'm in a hurry is I designate all the zucchini for baked products. And I'll shred it first, and then I'll measure it out in 1 cup increments. So I pre-grate it, measure it in 1 cup increments, because that just happens to be what works for my baked goods. And when it comes out of the freezer, yeah, it's a little bit soft, but it still has all the flavor and nutrition, and it adds moisture to anything that you bake with. Now, what if you're growing something that I haven't even shown here? Well, on our website, growingagreenerworld.com, we have recipes, tips, and even videos. Everything you need so that you can preserve your harvest long after the season is over.
The end of summer changeover at the garden farm is an ideal time for me to make a trip to my favorite nursery. Brian and Patrick are a couple of industry friends, and their local nursery is my go-to spot for all the best plants and the newest varieties of just about anything I want to include in my fall and winter crop plan. I actually make this visit twice a year, at the beginning of each growing season. While I do grow some of my own plants from seed, and it's certainly gratifying and inexpensive to do so, it can also be pretty labor intensive, especially if you don't have the time to devote to nursing your seeds along for weeks and months ahead of time. A big portion of gardening success comes from deciding which parts of the process you're willing to let go of. And for me, letting Brian and Patrick handle the greenhouse work, leaving me to walk the aisles and choose from their gorgeous plants, is a no-brainer of a trade-off. It's been 4 weeks since the big transition took place, where the bulk of the summer crops came out, the soil was amended, and the cool season crops went in, all over one long, wet weekend. Since then, the weather has been completely dry and temperatures have been mild. As a result, plants have responded well and have taken off. The fall garden is well on its way to a bountiful harvest. 3 beds of broccoli, including a stir-fry variety called Artwork. Other beds include plenty of curly leaf and dinosaur kale, collard greens, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, peas, beets, Swiss chard, and my favorite ornamental edible, giant red mustard. Today, I'll finish up my planting by adding garlic and overplanting with spinach and lettuce seeds. Even though it's getting later in the year, the season has been mild and soil temperatures are still warm enough and ideal for planting lettuce and spinach seeds. The combination works so well since the garlic takes up little horizontal space, and since harvesting won't take place until next summer, the lettuce and spinach will be mostly finished. So it's a great way to get more productivity out of a limited space. So one of the minor annoyances anytime you're growing leafy crops, especially those in the cabbage family, you're likely going to have a caterpillar that's going to consume those leaves. And I'm certainly not immune to that. It's right here all over my garden, but I don't worry about it either because it's a super easy fix, and as an organic gardener, there's a great control for it. We've talked about it before. It's BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a biological control. Basically, you just sprinkle it over the leaves, and then when the caterpillar consumes the leaf and gets a little bit of that in its system, it basically shuts down their digestive system, and within a couple of days, they stop eating, and that's the end of the cabbage worm. Now, when I buy BT, typically it has some sort of container that has holes in it where you can spread it out. But I like something a little more permanent, and this is what you can get at the dollar store. It's basically that jar that you put Parmesan cheese into and you sprinkle, but it's nice and even, it's kind of permanent, and it does a nice job. Another thing is, this is collard greens. I'll be eating these leaves, but because BT is safe and it only is harmful to the target pest, I don't have to worry about this harming me. As far as maintenance right now, I continue to add about 1 inch of homemade compost to all my beds that help build the soil, provide nutrients, and acts as my fall mulch layer. My compost includes a lot of chicken manure and bedding, while the manure and other inputs from my compost add valuable slow-release nitrogen and other important nutrients. But I also like to periodically add fish emulsion as a quick way to get nutrients to the plant. Fall crops are heavy feeders and like a consistent supply of nutrients all through the growing season, yet appreciate an extra boost a few times through the season. The compost and liquid organic fertilizer is the perfect winning combination. In addition to the chicken manure bedding and the kitchen scraps and the yard debris that goes into my compost bin, there's one other secret ingredient that I use all the time, and we've all heard about it. It's coffee grounds. Now, this is a fantastic addition to your compost pile too. Now, I go by my grocery store about 3 or 4 times a week, and right next door there's my coffee shop, and they've gotten to know me pretty well by now. So they usually have a bag or two waiting for me, and if I go by there 3 or 4 times a week, these bags weigh about 15 pounds each, so that's roughly 50 pounds of coffee grounds I'm adding to my compost bin, and that is a lot of contribution. And I'm doing them a favor because I'm helping them eliminate the waste they've got to deal with. I get the coffee grounds from my compost bin, plus we're keeping it out of the landfill, and that's huge. Plus, I take those bags and I recycle them when I go back to the grocery store. So it's a win-win-win all the way around. So you might want to try getting to be good friends with your barista too, because they might become your garden's best friend also. 4 weeks later, everything has jumped. The plants are responding really well to the soil, lots of compost, some fish emulsion recently. That's the only feeding I've done since I've planted, and everything looks really good. Temperatures are just now starting to cool off finally. I mean, we've had some relatively warm weather, and that could have something to do with the extra growth that we've had with these plants early on. But now we're truly into the fall weather, and everything is settling in nicely. The only thing I've done lately is plant some garlic and some spinach seeds, and now all the beds are complete. I've put some cattle panel grids over some of these beds, like this one right here that you can see, because I just put some more seeds there. And you know, I get the foraging squirrels and even an occasional cat that thinks that's their litter box, which is not cool, but you know, you've got to have a barrier there to prevent that from happening. So for me, with all these cattle panels I love to use, I just lay that over the top, and it's the perfect solution. And then once these plants fill the space, it doesn't seem to be a problem, and I just lift those out. And they're not resting right on the soil, they're on the edges, so there's room for everything to germinate without being obstructed by the wire. One of the greatest joys of having a fall vegetable garden, and one of the main selling points if you've never tried it, is just how undemanding it can be. There's not as much germination happening overall in the cooler temperatures, so weeding is minimal. A lot of your usual garden pests are also disappearing with a change in the weather, so all it takes is a little light maintenance to keep everything looking its best. And most cool season crops are ultra forgiving, so there's no real pressure to harvest at just the right time. In fact, once your fall garden is up and running, You may find that all you need to do is go out once a day to see what you want to pick to use for dinner that night. While a livestock panel can keep some critters out of your vegetable beds, it's not a universal solution. And this time of year can bring out a variety of hungry garden visitors. Animals sense the changing weather more acutely than we do, and for many of them, the temperature drop kickstarts their instincts to find more food to prepare them for winter. And for many animals, your fall garden is the perfect place to stock up. Don't be surprised if you find yourself having to add netting over some of your plants or rethink the fencing situation around your entire garden. Well, it's the day before Thanksgiving, and I have a lot to be thankful for in general, but especially with this garden. So today and for tomorrow's dinner, this is what I've harvested. Some kale and collards and broccoli and cabbage and peas and beets and mustard and lettuce and spinach. So that's a bounty, and there's a lot more where that came from. So gardening through the fall into early winter is kind of like playing chicken with Mother Nature. You don't want to flinch too soon, and you want to eke out that last harvest. But we all know that Mother Nature always shows us who's the boss, and that's what happened here. I had this beautiful bed of broccoli. Everything had headed up perfectly, and I was really looking forward to getting that harvest. But then we had cold weather, and it took out the bed, pretty much ruined all those beautiful heads. 2 weeks ago, we had 17-degree weather, and everything here was fine. And broccoli is one of those crops that can take the cold weather. And frankly, we don't get cold enough here for me to take precautions typically, because everything overwinters just fine. But then last week, we got 10 degrees, and that's what did it in. Just that 7-degree difference in temperature made all the difference in the world, and it pretty much wiped out all those beautiful heads. But it's not a total loss, because I still have side shoots coming out from after the main harvest and on some of the ones that are even damaged. So I still have the opportunity to take this into the kitchen and enjoy fresh broccoli, so it's not a total loss. Yes, I'm mad at myself, and I'm very disappointed that I didn't do more to protect them, but it's okay. And once these plants are finally through, I'll take them and put them into the compost bin as feedstock, and next season, they'll be back out here as compost to replenish these beds, and the cycle of life continues, and all is well. You know, I like to think of this area as my crash test garden, where mistakes are okay and failures are fine, as long as you learn from them. Like with my broccoli, at 17 degrees, I knew that was going to be fine, but at 10 degrees, not so much. Those 7 degrees made a huge difference. So I've recorded that in my journal, taking all those notes, and it is so important. It may sound like overthinking your hobby when you're recording every little detail, but I can't stress the importance of that, especially the weather, like the temperatures, the highs and the lows of the day, the rainfall, the wind conditions, anything unique. And then where you planted it, what you planted, when you planted it, all of those things make a huge difference when you need to go back and refer to it. And every microclimate is different, even within a zone. Like here in zone 7, what may be acceptable in one part of the city for growing may be different right where I live, but you never know that until you grow it yourself. And then write those notes down, and being able to refer back to those makes all the difference in the world. I've been doing it for years, and it's one of the main things that's made me a better gardener. And I hope you'll start doing the same if you haven't already. I'm Joe Lample. Thanks for joining us, everybody, for a year in the life of the garden farm, and we'll see you back here next time for more Growing a Greener World. I'm Joe Lample. When I created Growing a Greener World, I had one goal: to tell stories of everyday people, innovators, entrepreneurs, forward-thinking leaders, who are all, in ways both big and small, dedicated to organic gardening and farming, lightening our footprint, conserving vital resources, protecting natural habitats, making a tangible difference for us all. They're real, they're passionate, they're all around us. They're the game changers who are literally growing a greener world and inspiring the rest of us to do the same. Growing a greener world, it's more than a movement, it's our mission. Depending on your age, you may remember a song from the 70s that said, "Love will keep us together." But for many, it's the tomato that brings us together. And for tomato lovers near Raleigh, North Carolina, there's no better place to get together in late summer than Bree Arthur's house. You know Bree is the design and foodscaping correspondent for us here at Growing a Greener World. But you may not know her two other claims to fame. One, she throws an incredible garden party, and two, she's one of the premier tomato growers in the U.S. Those two things culminate each August with a massive tomato tasting party and fundraiser. Then there's Craig LaHoulier, also a Raleigh resident and one of the country's leading authorities on heirloom tomatoes. He's been growing, breeding, and studying tomatoes for over 30 years and is the author of the bestseller Epic Tomatoes. Craig and Bree put countless hours into their gardens each year. But for one day, it's time to stop and toast another epic tomato growing season.
Right, tomatoes bring us together. They bring all these people together. It's amazing.
As I was saying to someone before, if you were to have a parsnip party or a olive party, you may get 5 or 10 really fanatical people about it, but you throw a tomato party and
Everybody loves the gateway to gardening, right?
is.
And this is our responsibility as stewards of the gardening industry to encourage everyone.
These fruits or vegetables have chosen us
That's right.
to be part of their heritage, and we're pretty happy to play that part, I think.
Also, well, all that hard work and planning all becomes worthwhile when
It
you
does.
see and hear these
It does.
happy people
Yeah.
enjoying this experience.
It does.
It's a part Craig LaHoulier was seemingly born to play. From his youngest days in his grandfather's garden, then with his dad, and ultimately with his wife Susan. Through the process, Craig realizes his obsession with gardening and growing, especially heirloom tomatoes, was more about the story behind the plants, their uniqueness, historical relevance, varietal characteristics, and of course, flavor. Through the years, Craig has come to be known as the North Carolina Tomato Man. But the truth is, he's become known and loved around the world. He's even the one who named the beloved and famous heirloom favorite Cherokee Purple in 1990. And as a scientist, Craig doesn't miss a single detail about what makes heirloom tomatoes so special.
The nuances makes them very much like wine or dark chocolate or other maybe foodie pursuits where you can taste real differences. You've got the color, you can use them different ways. When you bite into it, does your mouth just jump and get all excited and all your taste buds are tantalized? There's a textural component. Is it creamy? Is it soft? Is it crunchy? Does it have give? Does it just melt in your mouth? All tomatoes have quite a bit of acidity, but they vary all over the map in all respects, whether it's flavor intensity, but mostly whether it's sugar. And that's a major component of tomatoes. And in fact, that really tart tomato that you may have loved as a child just happened to have very, very little sugar. It just didn't produce much, and it's the tomatoes genes that dictated that. Whereas if you taste a German Johnson, if you taste a brandy wine, there's just as much acidity, but there is so much sugar in there. Sometimes it levels out, and you say, wow, that tomato, everything is in perfect balance. Sometimes the sugar is so high that it's like eating a piece of fruit. You'll say, wow, that tomato tastes like a peach. And then what happens is you learn this, and you learn the different personalities of tomatoes, acidity, sweetness, you start using them in different ways. Sweet tomatoes are my cheeseburger tomato. The tart tomatoes are my salad tomato, because when that sugar's low and the acidity pops, you can use them in so many different ways that let the tomato shine through.
One other thing you need to know about Craig, besides the fact that he loves his tomatoes, he grows a ton of them each year. No, really, 2,000 pounds plus of tomatoes. And if that weren't shocking enough, what if I told you he grows them all in his driveway? Literally, his driveway.
This will become my garden. We get about 6 hours of direct sun, we get the heat of the concrete, the degree days are cranking, and at the end of the year, with about 250 plants split between tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers, we'll harvest about a ton of produce, and it will be wonderful. There are a lot of plants, and what will happen, the plan is many of these will end up in people's gardens. Many will be donated, but essentially this is how I start things off. Each year, I embark on experiments and projects, and what I plant is a combination of what we love to eat, what we love to save seed from, new things that people have sent me they want to explore, and creating new things for gardeners. So talk about an adventure. And it's just so gratifying to be able to take control of the quality and the variety of the food we eat.
Many people that come to gardening do so because of a special family member or friend. For Craig, a childhood introduction to gardening and growing tomatoes was just the beginning of a vocation he seemed destined for. In fact, in Craig's words, he believes that heirloom tomatoes chose him to help participate in their continued relevance.
I was very fortunate to have a grandfather, Walter, on my mother's side, and maybe every grandparent has a kid they particularly like. And for some reason, I was Walter's favorite. He had a great, big, wonderful garden at the back of his house. And not many people, I think, in the family even knew about it. But on nice days, he would take me back there and walk me through. And when you're a little kid, 3, 4 years old, you're up close and personal with water spigots. And you can be close to the ground and smell the strawberries. And you can come face to face with scary spiders. But these things make an impression on you. So about 15 or 20 years ago, my wife and I first moved in, and we started embarking on this gardening and growing our food. The first thing that we want to do is have a garden, and we had these extra seedlings. We'd bring them to the farmer's market, and we'd set up, and they'd be in Dixie cups. And the vendors would look at us walking in with our Dixie cups and be a little bit amused. They were quite professional, of course. And so we were sitting there one beautiful Saturday, perfect weather, just like this morning. This elderly man just kind of hobbled up with his cane, and he's just looking through our plants and reading. And he had a thick southern accent, and he goes, "Wenzel, Wenzel, that's a variety that I thought was extinct. I haven't seen that tomato since my granddad grew it, and I was working on the farm with him, and I loved my granddad. And to be able to taste a Wenzel again would just be wonderful." So I said, "Well, sir, I'd like you to take these plants, take them home and grow them." So we didn't think much of that until the next year. The man came back, and he asked for Wenzels, and he insisted on paying for them. And he said, "They were incredible. They reconnected me with memories of my granddad, and I'm just so thankful for you." And he went away, and I turned to Sue, and I said, "That's why we do what we do. It's all very clear to me now, and I'm not really sure where this is leading us. All I know is it's a good place, and we're just going to follow the road forward and see where it takes us."
Where it's taken Craig every year is back to his driveway and basement, starting in mid-February. That's where the annual ritual he loves so much begins, with the planting of his current season's heirloom tomato seeds. But like with everything Craig does, he's got a unique system for this too.
When I plant my seed, I don't plant 1 seed per cell or 2 seeds per cell. I'll plant 20 or 30 or 50 seeds per cell.
In a little square cell.
1 inch, 1.5 inch square. Now where that gets me is in a footprint of 1 by 2 feet. I can produce up to 2,000 seedlings.
Then what?
So when I plant them, I found that by barely covering the seed, placing them on a constant temperature, very simple heat mat, no temperature control, providing some bottom warmth. And what I found is quite an important step is I loosely drape just a sheet of plastic. Now a dome would work fine, it's just I didn't have any domes. And what I do each day is flip that, because overnight condensation will form, beads of water, and if I flip it, the sun will then shine, dry the water off, and I'm not at a risk for damping off disease. And once the majority of the seeds germinate, they're actually pushing that light saran wrap up, and it's fine. I'll remove it then once, I would say, 40 out of my 50 seeds cells germinate. Then they sit in front of the window. They will exhibit phototropism. They will go to the light. They'll bend. So each day I flip those 180 degrees. So now we've got these seedlings and they're starting to bend to the light, and I don't want them to get leggy. So I will do something else that's somewhat unusual. If we have a nice, calm, sunny day where it's in the mid-40s, maybe mid-50s, I may bring them out into filtered sun just for an hour. And then they'll go under lights. And I will lower those lights until the fluorescent tubes are maybe within an inch of the surface of the growing tip.
And by not having the dome over them, which you don't need anymore because they've germinated, you can get right down on top of the
You can get really close, but then it takes it's that month from the seeding. So you're about the month phase, your plants maybe have true leaves, which are not the little round cotyledon leaves, but the toothy leaves are starting to come out. Then you're ready to go. And then I like to crank up the music, maybe open a beer and have a transplant party in my garage. And it's very therapeutic. And then I will sit them on my garage floor, water them well, because they're separated from their friends now. Maybe there were 50 of them all huddled together taking up water. Now they're in this big 3.5-inch pot. Wow, I got to figure this out. I got to start taking up water again. Water them well, sit them in the shade of the garage for a couple of days, because what you don't want to do is those baby seedlings, expose them to a stress condition, bright midday sun. Those roots haven't figured out how to really rapidly take up water yet. Once they're kind of settled in, they come out here, they get sun all day. It makes for very tough seedlings.
Over the years, Craig has been working to tweak his soil mix to come up with the perfect recipe, and he's found it, and now he uses it year after year, and it's incredibly simple. It's 2-part soilless mix to 1 part composted cow manure. In a garden center, it's 1 full bag of soilless mix to half a bag of composted manure. You mix it together, and it's that simple. Then you add it to your growing environment. Now, in a normal garden, you would typically mix that into your native soil, but Craig's garden is anything but normal. It's his driveway, and he uses these growing bags. They're 5-gallon plastic bags that he buys online in bulk. They're pretty inexpensive, about 75 cents a piece. He fills the bag with the soilless mix up to about 2 inches from the top, and then he makes room for the plant in the middle, tucks the plant in, backfills the soil, and that's all you need. The soil drains really well. There's holes already cut into the bottom of the bag. It sits flat on the surface, and he's got about 200 of these in his driveway. But if you're a space challenge as well, whether it's a deck or a driveway or a balcony, this could work perfectly for you too. And if you want more tips on growing the perfect tomato, we have that on our website under the show notes for this episode. The website address, it's the same as our show name. It's growingagreenerworld.com. Craig has one more clever trick, topping off his tomato plants with a free resource that most of us generate plenty of in the spring and summer.
But I'm going to come over here and get some untreated grass clippings.
Okay.
And I love to use these as mulch because they slowly break down and feed the soil. There's no chemicals of any sort in them. But what they do is they provide warmth, and they also prevent any of the planting medium from affecting the bottom foliage.
Right.
And even though you can barely see the plant in there, with the black bag absorbing the heat of the sun, with the moisture being retained by that layer of mulch, and I will replace that each time I mow the lawn, this plant is going to take off like a rocket ship.
Wow. Once Craig has the plants safely tucked into the grow bags, he makes sure to keep them watered at least once every day, sometimes more. The heat on a driveway, especially in the Carolinas in the summer, can be brutal on plants. Craig also gives his plants a weak dilution of liquid fertilizer every week. The frequency is because with so much watering, the nutrients quickly leach out and need to be replaced. A diluted formulation ensures his plants aren't overfed in the process. And that routine leads to rapidly growing and very healthy, productive plants. Just 7 weeks later, we're back for our mid-season visit and looking at a driveway full of tall, thriving plants, over 200 in fact, all growing in about 3 gallons of soil, yet still projected to yield over a ton of fruit before the season is over. While that's a lot of tomatoes, no matter how you slice it, Craig's goal is not to maximize his yield. Rather, it's to produce several good tomato specimens from each plant that can be further studied and the seeds saved for future generations. So keeping plants to a productive but manageable size is extra important to Craig.
For me, success is a few clusters of ripe fruit. So I'm limiting the plants by pruning away all but 2 or 3 suckers early on to give me no more than 3, sometimes 4 growing.
Okay, so back to the suckers for a second.
Sure.
Those are kind of the thugs. That's
Yep.
what really gives us more volume in this
Yes.
case than we really want.
Yep.
So if we're trying to control that size, out and up, one of the things we want to do is take the suckers out. They're
Right.
neither bad nor good, they're
Right.
there.
They provide shade for the fruits, it doesn't get sun scale, but every time that a stem meets leaf, you're going to shoot out a sucker or a flower stem. What you want to do is not remove the flower stems, of course, but you want to limit the number of suckers. This plant has 3 growing stems, it's all it needs. So this stem, for example, I'm going to just snap off that sucker, and that plant is now controlled.
But when you get to the height, as
Yep.
indeterminate tomatoes are famous for doing, they just keep going.
Yes.
And we don't want that.
Right.
You have a trick for controlling the height.
I do, and it's just looking at the last flower cluster that you think will ripen, keeping the 2 leaves hands above, and then just making a cut right above. If you're at 3 feet, that stem will get no taller than 3 feet. You remove any suckers that form below, but that gives you a way of controlling the height and keeping everything in bounds.
And leaving the leaves above is just really to help shade off the fruit.
That's exactly right.
As you walk around Craig's driveway garden, you can't help but notice some of his unorthodox techniques at work. Here's one of my favorites, and it's a trick I can't wait to use back at the garden farm. Some of those plants that started in tiny containers are now growing out of bales of straw. There are several benefits from growing in straw bales. To start, any time you would normally plant something in a traditional way is the perfect time to plant in a straw bale. And anywhere you can put a straw bale is a place you can grow your plants. So no digging or prepping into impossible soil. Even a driveway or balcony will work if it can support the weight. Plants are also less susceptible to soil-borne diseases in straw bales because there isn't any soil. And of course, simply based on their size and shape, you have an instant raised bed garden, so no need to bend over as much as you would if planting directly into the ground. And at the end of the season, you have plenty of organic material to add to your compost pile or spread as mulch around other parts of your garden. One of the primary ways tomatoes have always been classified is by their growth habit and how and when they produce fruit. The 2 classic types are determinate and indeterminate.
So typical indeterminate, very tall growing suckers at each junction between a leaf and the main stem. And it will set fruit about every 6 to 12 inches up the stem. So your yield over the course of a season is going to be gradual but consistent. Determinate, which is a type that didn't even exist until the 1920s, has a very unusual structure, and anyone who has purchased or grown Roma will know what a determinate does. The plant wants to be a ball of tomatoes. It grows to a certain height and then it starts blossoming on the leaf stem. It will set a boatload of tomatoes, they'll ripen very quickly together, and then the plant will go down. So Roma is a perfect example because you want a lot of sauce. You want to harvest a lot of Romas and then you make your sauce. And then the plant's done.
And now there's a third type of tomato to work into the mix. It's perhaps the best of all worlds, especially for people wanting the smaller size, but with the continuous fruit set and flavor options of the larger indeterminate tomatoes. These are not determinate.
Right.
These are truly dwarfs, and this is new to a lot of people, but I think it's the future of gardening. Tell me about these.
They're wonderfully attractive varieties. You can see that the foliage has a bluish cast to them. It's crinkly, it's vigorous, the stems are nice and straight. A short cage, a short stake is perfect for them. So what you've got is a tomato that a patio gardener, a driveway gardener like me can put in a pot, can put in a straw bale. If you compare them to the traditional indeterminate types, which are about 4 feet tall, the dwarfs that were planted on the very same date are 2 feet tall, and they will maintain that growth differential throughout the season.
Wow.
So you get plants that can produce big, colorful, delicious tomatoes on plants that don't need to be pruned at all, easy to maintain. I'll be able to pick these eye level. This is as tall as they'll get. And we've been able to recreate the colors and the flavors and the varieties of heirlooms. In these varieties, they're open pollinated, meaning you save seed, they'll come exactly the same. So in 50 or 100 years, we're hoping many of these will become heirlooms themselves and really help bring gardening to more and more people.
7 weeks later, and we're back for our third and final visit of the tomato growing season. It's mid-August and most of the plants have been harvested. For most tomato growers around here, the season is over, except for the celebration. It's the perfect time to gather with friends and family to share the highs, lows, and challenges of another year. Nothing says summer better than the taste of homegrown tomatoes, and Bree's Party is the perfect place to celebrate the eagerly anticipated harvest.
9 months of planning and the tomato tasting has finally arrived. And we have a great show of friends and family that are here celebrating the ultimate taste of summer.
This right here is a Cherokee Purple, which of course I get to name this. The J.D. Green chose me to send this to. And there's lots of them over there, and they're absolutely delicious. So it's an honor to see my namesake tomato here, but really, you could taste 15, 20, 30 different types of tomatoes, get all kinds of different impressions. But you need to mix in people, you need to mix in great food, and with tomatoes you can actually have a party.
But the end of the season celebration of what worked so deliciously means it's also time to look back at what maybe didn't go quite as well or could be improved for next season. All part of the constant evaluation and re-evaluation of every garden, even ones that happen in plastic bags in the driveway.
And as always at this time of the year, I'm quite ready for things to wind down so I can take some time in cooler weather and really give a hard think about what worked well and what I need to do differently. Because that's a really important part of a gardener's planning, is not only doing it up front, but then taking a good time to sit down at the end of it and just evaluate so you can do it even better next year. So I think it's important for the gardener at the end of the year where it's easy to feel you're depressed, you're tired, you've done a lot of sweating, you're seeing disease in your plants, you're missing the tomatoes that you were harvesting a week earlier. But then you look at the seed that you've saved and the pictures you've taken and the memories you've had and the results. When I see my box of saved seed, that really is the confirmation that I've had a successful season, because I can now carry all of those varieties on, share them with other gardeners, and feel like I can be the living link to make sure these varieties stay forever.
The tomato. Easy to grow, yet anything but simple when you look at how many people are so passionate about this perfect little fruit. And if you're like the Craigs of the world, literally growing a ton of them in your driveway and documenting every detail about those organic heirlooms to pass them on for future generations, or you're one of those people that just likes to have a few beefsteaks on hand for that perfect BLT, there's a lot more to know than just growing a few tomatoes. Like Bree says, tomatoes are the gateway to gardening, and I think she might just be right. In fact, I think this little guy right here just might be the key to growing a greener world. I'm Joe Lample. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you back here next time for more Growing a Greener World. I'm Joe Lample. When I created Growing a Greener World, I had one goal: to tell stories of everyday people, innovators, entrepreneurs, forward-thinking leaders who are all, in ways both big and small, dedicated to organic gardening and farming, lightening our footprint, conserving vital resources, protecting natural habitats, making a tangible difference for us all. They're real, they're passionate, they're all around us. They're the game changers who are literally growing a greener world and inspiring the rest of us to do the same. Growing a greener world, it's more than a movement, it's our mission.
Back in 2006, my mom and I took a trip to winter tour in Delaware. And the Flight 93 memorial is on the way from Ohio to Delaware, so we decided we would stop.
Kylie Baumley knew that visit to Shanksville, Pennsylvania would be a profound and moving experience, but she had no idea it would change her life.
We got back in the car to go back home, and Mom said, "Look what I found." And she found this beautiful, perfect monarch. It had died. And we looked at it, and it had a sticker on it, a little white sticker about the size of a pencil eraser. And it had a website, a phone number, and an identification number. And we didn't know what that was about, so when I got home, I looked it up. And here it was, a butterfly that had been tagged through the University of Kansas and Monarch Watch, their program where they track the migration of the monarch butterflies to Mexico. So that's what got me started. I was fascinated. I learned the story of the migration, the metamorphosis, all the steps, everything that has to happen to complete the whole life cycle, and I was just fascinated by it, and I have been ever since. We know that the monarch is in peril. They've declined by 90%. The population of the eastern part of the U.S., east of the Rockies, has declined by 90%. And we are collectively as a nation trying to do something to reverse that. You know, they're very iconic. Everybody recognizes them. They're the most recognized butterfly in North America. And I don't want to see them go away.
There's a very real chance of that happening. Ask any gardener these days what's on their short list of upcoming projects, and there's a good chance they'll say a butterfly or pollinator garden. That's because the loss of so many native habitats has decimated many of the plants these insects need to survive. But as gardeners often do, they're rising up now in force in their efforts to restore lost pollinator habitats across the country, often starting in their own backyards. In today's episode, we work with some of the nation's top experts and citizen scientists like Kylie, who share surprisingly simple ways to help us restore the populations of these threatened insects in gardens of any size. It's easier than you think. Not only can we beautify our own landscapes with native plants, but we can give monarchs and other butterfly species and pollinators a fighting chance.
We all like to see butterflies flitting around our garden, but why are they important? For one thing, they are pollinators. They're not as efficient as our bees and some of our wasps, but they do pollinate, which is important because it helps produce the next generation of plants through the seeds. But they're also prey for a whole host of other insects and birds and small mammals.
Honeybees get all the buzz right now, and their fight for survival is a real concern. Many people may not realize that butterflies also occupy a critical slot in our planetary ecosystem and the global food chain in particular. Whether they're helping to pollinate the edible crops that we depend on for food, or acting as the food source for other animals who have their own role to play, butterflies are much more than just pretty faces in the gardens of the world, and their decline could have far-reaching implications. While most of us are just becoming aware of the danger, Dennis Krusak has been sounding the alarm for a while. As an endangered species specialist with the U.S. Forest Service, he's had an up-close look at the devastating effects that human progress can have on the animal kingdom.
Butterflies are in decline for three main reasons: habitat loss, pesticides, and climate change. And as the population becomes more urban, it doesn't matter what metropolitan area you live in, you are seeing habitat loss on a daily basis. We're taking down our green space, putting in the perfect lawn, and then we're coming behind it to maintain the lawn with all of our pesticides, and it's taking out all of the native insects, not just butterflies. And then climate change is having an effect because the insects are getting out of sync with the plant communities. It's important to know, with all the habitat loss going on, that there are some butterfly species that are narrow endemic, which basically means they've got a very small localized home range. And if we're losing all that habitat, if we take it out, they're on the way to extinction. There's nothing else we can do about it because they're not going to migrate to new habitat. They are tied to those natural plant communities.
But there's nothing that says you can't build new plant communities. That's exactly what Jackie Bellwood did. Jackie knows plenty about the plight of pollinators because she's a wildlife biologist and professor, not to mention Dennis's wife. But it was one of her students that served as the impetus for the pollinator garden that she helped create on the campus at Georgia Highlands College.
It all goes back to a day when a student came into my office with a hummingbird in her hand, and she said she'd been walking across campus and literally this hummingbird basically just fell out of the sky, hit the pavement, she picked it up, and when I thought about it afterwards, I looked around campus and I said that we shouldn't really be surprised by this because our college campus is basically a very nice set of buildings in a sea of just manicured green lawn with no flowers at all for these animals to feed on. So I decided, after we'd had the hummingbird for about a week, that we needed to put a garden in. And not just for hummingbirds, but also for butterflies, bees, and all the other pollinators that need a constant source of flowers, essentially from spring to fall, on which to feed. We started off with just 3 beds. They were 4 by 8. We bought some kits that we could use. Basically, they're just kind of a plasticky material, and we made 4 by 8 beds. They're about a foot deep, and that was our first year. It was so successful that the next year we more or less doubled the size of our little plot. The third year we put in some more beds to the point where we now have about 250 square feet. It's not a large garden at all, but the original plants are all there, including the ones that we've added every year. They just keep growing and growing and growing. And basically what we've done is we've created a little ecosystem in this sea of grass that has predators, it has prey, it has a great diversity of different insects, all of which essentially are part now of our little pollinator community.
But it's always a work in progress, and Jackie's pollinator garden at Georgia Highlands College is no exception. After just 2 years, they noticed that their garden bed kits that they bought at the box store were starting to deteriorate really badly. So they came up with a great solution that's also a wonderful idea for anybody that's challenged for space. These are called planter wall blocks, and you can find them at your home improvement center. They're made of precast concrete, and they have these recesses in the sides meant to accept basic 2x6 lumber. Use the blocks as your corners and drop in boards to create a raised bed of basically any size you want. If you want to go taller, you could stack the blocks and anchor them to the ground with a piece of rebar right through the center hole. And to really go green, you can use composite decking instead of real milled lumber. This stuff is made from 95% recycled materials like sawdust and plastic film. Cut it to length with regular power tools, and you've got your raised pollinator bed ready to fill with soil and plants within 30 minutes. It's totally customizable to whatever size and shape you want. It'll last longer than a pre-bought kit and probably cost you less too. It's an easy way to put a pollinator garden almost anywhere and be enjoying butterflies almost instantly. You may see the occasional butterfly breeze through your yard and think to yourself, there's a butterfly, everything is great, my landscape must be doing its part. But are you really doing enough? Dennis says maybe not. It could be that your neighbor's garden is the one that's pollinator friendly, with the two things that butterflies need most, host plants and nectar plants. And whether you've got acres of farmland, a suburban backyard, or even a condo in the city, it's an easy thing to add the right blooming plants that will aid in butterfly conservation. In other words, don't just leave it up to your neighbor.
If you want to attract butterflies to your garden, the first thing I would do is eliminate pesticides if you're using pesticides. And if you can't eliminate them, at least minimize the pesticides, because the pesticide you put down is not species specific and it will kill everything in your yard. It doesn't matter whether it's your ladybugs or your lacewings that are eating the aphids and the thrips that are eating your flowers, or the caterpillars or the butterflies you're trying to conserve. The pesticides will kill them, so eliminate the best you can pesticides. The next thing to do is consider what species do you want to attract? What is native to your area? And because you need to know what species you want to attract so you can plant the appropriate host plants. Host plants are the plants that the females will lay their eggs on, and some species are host specific. Monarch butterfly females will only lay eggs on milkweed. The fritillaries are going to lay their eggs on passion vine. Zebra swallowtails are going for pawpaws. So you need to know what's native to your area and decide what you want to garden for and get those host plants in the ground.
If you're like me, you can never seem to have enough plants in your garden to attract butterflies and other pollinators. And while we all have a wide variety of general options for food sources, from the often overlooked but highly beneficial oak tree to a number of shrubs and countless perennials and annuals, we can all do more to help. Typically, the most widely available plants we can buy are good general options, but the most important plants we can add for attracting and helping the butterfly population is to provide more host-specific native plants that provide food and nesting sites for specialist butterflies. They're the ones that rely on a single type of plant for food and habitat, like what milkweed is for monarchs. But the problem often begins for homeowners when we're unsure of what plants to buy that are best for whatever butterflies we're trying to attract. Now, some quick online research can help with that. But once we know, it can be quite the challenge to find exactly what we're looking for at garden centers. While they typically carry the most popular general pollinator-friendly plants, that doesn't solve the problem of finding those host-specific plants. Fortunately, there are more nurseries around the country that are starting to provide native plants that are also host-specific for the butterflies that would be found in your area. And to help with that, there are companies that were created to identify, grow, and provide native plants specifically selected for each region that are the best choices for butterflies and pollinators, including host-specific plants. So the next best thing after doing your homework, always my first choice, is to make friends with a knowledgeable, trusted expert or garden professional, or look for branded plants selected as pollinator friendly at your independent garden center or online. It's just one more way to take the guesswork out of gardening. For more information and links about what plants you should be growing in your garden to help attract and protect butterflies, be sure to check out our website under the show notes for this episode. The migration of the monarch butterfly. It's an incredible phenomenon within the animal world. The monarch is the only butterfly that makes a trip south for the winter and back again in spring, just like birds. During their journey, most monarchs log 50 to 100 miles of flight in a single day, and some go as far as 3,000 miles in one trip. Since the monarch moment she had in the Pennsylvania countryside, and without any formal training or expertise, Kylie has become a self-taught expert, even writing a book on the subject. And she's made it her mission to educate others on what makes the monarch so unique and so uniquely important to our environment.
Everything about them fascinates me. From the very tiny egg that's the size of a grain of sugar, and that a little tiny caterpillar comes out of that, turns right around, eats its egg case for its very first meal. Then it goes to the milkweed, which, by the way, is the only plant that a monarch can raise its young on. That's the only thing they eat. But once you get to the end of the summer, the monarchs that come out at the end of August through September and through fall are the ones that are going to migrate. Once they're adults, they don't really make use of milkweed. By that time in the year, the milkweed's not blooming, so they don't even really use the nectar from the milkweed plant. They don't eat it. They need the nectar from plants like goldenrod, asters, Joe pieweed, annuals like zinnias. Anything that has nectar late in the season is very, very important to them, because as they travel from the lower part of Canada all the way to Mexico, they have to fatten up. They have to get their reserves so that they can keep going. So all along that flyway between Canada and Mexico, they need to be able to find nectar from these plants. So just as important as the milkweed are these late season blooming plants that have nectar to fuel them on their way, because the monarchs that go to Texas, through Texas into Mexico, are the ones that are going to be the basis for the population for the following year. And the monarchs that start out in Canada and the United States that funnel down through Texas into Mexico will stay the winter in the Oyamel fir forest there in the Sierra Madre Mountains. And they're in diapause. They're in a state of diapause while they're there. They don't sexually mature when they come out in Canada and the US. They have one mission, and that is to get to Mexico. While they're down there, they cluster on these trees in a very protected, very specific protected environment. That's a miracle in itself, because they've never been there before. But they go there. They go to the exact same place every year. How they know where to go, how they find this place, not ever having been there, is still part of the mystery. But once in the spring that it starts to warm up, then they come out of diapause, they will mate, and then they will start their trek northward. They get to where they find milkweed, which they know they need for their young, and they will lay eggs. Then they die. Then those eggs, when they hatch and mature, they will continue to fly northward following the milkweed. They will only go as far as milkweed grows. That's the farthest north that they'll go.
And that, Kylie says, is where those of us who live anywhere along that all-important flyway between Mexico and Canada can get involved in saving this majestic species.
There are things that you can do even if you're not a gardener. Of course, we know plant milkweed, plant the nectar plants for late in the season, but you can also support organizations that are supporting the monarchs. Monetarily, you can do volunteer work. Community gardens, suggest to your community that you put in a habitat garden. If you help the monarchs, you're going to be helping all the pollinators. So it's not just monarch specific. Yes, they're going to benefit, but all pollinators are going to benefit from anything that you do for the monarchs.
Kim Pegram is an insect ecologist and butterfly specialist at the Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix. She's also leading the charge in educating the public about ways to get in touch with monarchs and ensure their survival through pollinator planting in their own yards.
The greater Phoenix area is a huge expanse of land. And if you think about a butterfly that's trying to cross that area, we want to provide what we call habitat stepping stones. If you think about the city like a pond, they need these little spots that provide the nectar plants, that provide the milkweed that they need. So anybody can become a Monarch Way Station. So it's a certification you get through another organization called Monarch Watch. And what it does, it's certification that you have provided everything that a monarch needs. You can even get a little sign from Monarch Watch that tells your friends and neighbors that you're providing all these resources for monarch butterflies.
But there's another way you can get involved, and it's even more hands-on.
In addition to planting a garden for monarchs, something else that anybody can participate in is monarch tagging. Tagging is a citizen science program that allows people, when monarchs arrive in their backyard, to place a tag on the monarch, and we can track where it goes in the migration. The Tag is just a little sticker, goes on the outside of the wing. It doesn't hurt the butterfly, doesn't affect their ability to fly, and it has an identification number and an email address on it. There are people in the overwintering sites in Mexico and California looking for monarchs with tags on them. So what happens is if a monarch comes to your backyard and you have your set of tags that you've gotten from one of the organizations, you put the tag on the outside of the wing and you tell the organization you got the tags from, the identification number, when you tagged it, what it was doing, and then you let it go. Hopefully they find it, and now we know where it started and where it ended up. Not only are people in Mexico and California and these overwintering sites looking for tags, anybody can also spot a monarch tag. If you have a monarch that shows up in your backyard and you see this little, it's usually a white tag that's on the outside of the wing, take a quick photograph of it, try to get a good look at it, get that identification number, get that email address, email them to say you found this monarch in this location. And that again helps to find the migration routes, to find out where they're starting and where they're ending up, where they're traveling through.
Educational programs from nature centers, books, even tagging programs from citizen scientists are all making a big difference. But nothing connects us more to nature than watching that complete life cycle of a butterfly right before our eyes. And if you have young children, it can be one of those moments that changes everything and something they'll probably never forget. And that's exactly what happened with one of our Growing a Greener World viewers, Krista Ferguson, in a video that she shared with us from her family.
Hi, Growing a Greener World. My name is Krista, and these are my girls. And we have had the best time raising monarch butterflies this season. It all started with the butterfly garden at my daughter's school. And then I learned that we could do the same thing in our own backyard. We had a few nectar plants already, so all we needed was milkweed. We went to our local nursery and picked up a few plants, and then it didn't take long for the monarchs to find us and start laying their eggs. Once we found the eggs on our milkweed plants, we simply moved them into an enclosure so that we could protect them from predators and watch the whole process firsthand. While the entire metamorphosis is really incredible, my favorite part is when the butterflies first emerge and their wings are wet, and they sway ever so gently back and forth, allowing their wings to dry before they take flight. It is truly serene. What's been your favorite part?
My favorite part was watching the caterpillars turn into crystals. It was really amazing for me.
It really was. They would hang in a J for a day or two, wouldn't they? And then, boom, it would happen really fast. What's been your favorite part?
My favorite part has been watching the caterpillars eat and grow.
They sure do eat a lot, don't they?
Yeah.
Now that I've become a bit of a monarch mama, I plan to do this for many years to come. It's just been so simple and rewarding. Thank you so much for allowing us to share our monarch butterfly journey with you.
Maybe you've never given butterflies much thought before, except when one floats past you in the garden. But butterflies play a huge role in the larger ecosystem at work all around us. And right now, some of them are struggling. We hope today's episode gave you greater insight into the importance of protecting these pollinators and why it's up to all of us to make that happen. Be more proactive, become a citizen scientist, or at the very least, install some native plants that attract more butterflies and pollinators. And wherever you can, promote healthier habitats. You could end up saving a lot more than a butterfly or two. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I'm Joe Lample, and we'll see you back here next time for more Growing a Greener World. I'm Joe Lample. When I created Growing a Greener World, I had one goal: to tell stories of everyday people, innovators, entrepreneurs, forward-thinking leaders who are all, in ways both big and small, dedicated to organic gardening and farming, lightening our footprint, conserving vital resources, protecting natural habitats, making a tangible difference for us all. They're real, they're passionate, they're all around us. They're the game changers who are literally growing a greener world and inspiring the rest of us to do the same. Growing a greener world, it's more than a movement, it's our mission. Moving into a new house, it's one of those milestone moments, and for many, the ultimate upcycling project. Taking something that's old and tired and breathing new life into it by making a few changes and putting your personal stamp on it. But the process, it can take a really long time and sometimes feel like it's never ending. Like here at the garden farm, I'm just now getting around to one of those remodel projects I've had on my list since day one. So now I can finally unpack those last few boxes. But you know, beyond the unpacking and the furniture moving and the new coat of paint, maybe the remodel job, many of us never take it beyond these four walls. But your house is just the interior. But the home you live in should include the landscape too. And sometimes making a change out there can repurpose your entire life. Today we'll introduce you to a man whose yard inspired an entire new way of living for himself, his family, and countless other families too. And who knows, maybe it will inspire you also.
So it wasn't until I owned my first home, which is this home, that I really realized that I had anything to do with the ground, with plants, with dirt, with doing anything handy. But I was literally, when I was walking through this yard, when it was still kind of a mess, that I kind of remembered back to when I was a kid and I was out in the yard with my mom and my dad, and my grandparents were all huge gardeners. And that's when I kind of discovered that this is kind of something that I'm a part of, that it's me.
But before Doug Scott's revelation, it started with him and his fiancée, Brittany, and a 40-year-old house no one wanted.
Doug and I were engaged and looking for a house to buy, and we had looked around and we put flyers in people's mailboxes of houses we liked, but one day I was on a walk with a friend and we were in this neighborhood. I'd never been in this neighborhood before, and there was this house for sale. And it was overgrown, but it had a nice big yard, and everything we looked at seemed to have been a smaller yard, and it seemed like it had a lot of space of a house, so it looked like it had a lot of potential.
Potential is a key word, because at that point, you really couldn't see the house from the street. And since we were, like she said, we were engaged, we were planning a wedding, I just knew that we couldn't take on this project and survive our engagement and eventually get married if we were trying to also tackle this house. So we passed on it. But not surprisingly, because it was such an overgrown mess, it was still for sale when we were married for about 3 or 4 months and came back. And Brittany trusted me enough and trusted the vision that I had, and we put an offer on it and made it our first home.
As he tried to tame years of overgrowth in the yard, Doug found something he didn't expect.
As I started to uncover, getting rid of some of these nasty shrubs and opening up the trees to let sunshine in, that I started seeing some of these other plants that at one time had been loved and taken care of. And I had to move them around a bit to get them now in the right place in the right sun. But that's really when I discovered that, being outside, taking care of plants, and making a space outside a cool place to be was really kind of who I was made to be, who was, what I was created to do, I guess.
But as is the case for so many, Doug's newfound passion took a bit of a backseat to his real life. His job in corporate America limited the time he could devote to transforming the outdoor spaces surrounding their home.
Fast forward about 8 years. You know, I was out in the garden all the time whenever I wanted to be because it was fun. We had a major renovation to our home. We had a couple kids. And you know, and gardening had become more than just kind of this passing thing. Yes, it was where I would find myself when everything was good in the world. I'd want to find myself out there in the yard, building something, moving plants around. But it was also basically my medication when things weren't right with the world. I would want to be out there, and being outside in the garden is where I wanted to be. So whenever we went on vacation or wherever we went on trips, I mean, I would pack my bag with gardening magazines, with sketchbooks, because that is just, it's just who I was. That's who I had become, is a guy who dreamed about cool spaces outside. So we'd made some really cool spaces outside that we really loved, but the house and our yard really hadn't taken on our personality as much, didn't really have kind of the Scott stamp on it. And it was really Brittany who, when she signed my oldest and me up for a family vegetable gardening workshop at the Botanical Gardens, that really, I think, our personality really started to kind of show through here. So my oldest and I went to this vegetable gardening workshop, and I thought I'd come home with a proverbial lima bean in a cup, and we could put it in a pot and be done with it. But that wasn't the case. We came home with 70, little seedlings in Dixie cups, and I had to figure out, what am I going to do in a shady yard with 70 vegetable seedlings? So I rented a sledgehammer, and that lasted for about 10 bloody knuckles. And then I had a friend who has a bobcat, and he came over here and took away part of my driveway where I actually had sun. And that's where really kind of the Scott part of our yard started to take life, right? We had our vegetable garden, which was unlike any other vegetable garden that we'd seen, but it had the Scott family stamp on it. And it had our story. It had the story of my daughter and me going to this vegetable garden, family vegetable garden workshop. I have pictures of them helping me build these raised beds, and picking their first tomato that they shoved in their mouth, and not knowing how long you should leave a zucchini on there, and by the time we got it, it was bigger than they were, right? And so it was just awesome. But that was really where everything really started to take off from there.
And take off it did. Now, 15 years after moving in, Doug has reimagined almost every square foot of the 3/4 of an acre property, and every bit of it is custom designed for his family and their lifestyle. It's a remarkable blend of functional spaces and whimsical touches, a showcase of blooms and plant textures, places for gathering together, and spots to get away from it all.
One of the areas in our backyard that really showed the biggest transformation was right outside of our back basement door. At the time when we first bought the house, the AC unit was literally right outside that back door, and it was really one of the last places that you'd want to hang out, because every 15 minutes it'd make this huge, horrible sound. So I moved it around the corner so it wasn't as loud right there, and I built a deck with a pergola and put Clematis armandii up there, which now kind of gives you this kind of romantic, kind of cascading feel. So we also added this hanging daybed, which is the perfect place to hang out, to take a nap, to read a book. It literally is what once was the last place we'd want to be in our backyard, is now probably the place that we fight over, because it really is just a really cool, beautiful spot to spend time in. We at one time had the swing set right smack dab in the middle of the yard, because that's where we wanted to see our girls play, right outside our kitchen window. But once they got older and we're not playing there all the time, we didn't want to be looking at this big monstrosity of a play set. So we moved it away. So we decided, well, what do we want to put there? So that's where we put our fire pit. And it's an awesome place for us to hang out as a family and hang out with friends. So every year, my wife tries to make a decision that moves us forward in living a healthier life. She knows that if we tried to do it all at once, that it would not be sustainable at all. So the first step was our vegetable garden, and it was awesome. Our girls started to understand where food came from. They're getting a little bit of dirt under their fingernails. And so the next year was, why don't we try to get eggs? Why don't we get chickens? But we had no idea where to put them. I didn't want to put them right outside of our back door. So we had this side yard that literally was a wasteland. There was a dying tree, so we decided that's where we were going to put our chickens. And we literally transformed what was this forgotten area into what we now affectionately call the Scott family farm. We have a chicken coop and bunny hutch and chicken run and potting bench with a rain barrel and shed for everything that we need. I mean, it really is, you know, this little farm that you would never expect to see out in the suburbs of Atlanta. And it's just in our side yard. My girls have been talking about wanting to have a playhouse. And I knew where I wanted to put it generally, but it was pretty close to the chicken coop area. So I was like, well, I need to hide this somehow. So one of the ways I thought of hiding it was to put it up underneath the umbrella of a magnolia tree and make it a tree house. And I mean, it came out really cool. I made it big enough to where not only would they enjoy it, but big enough to where the four of us could get up there and camp out. And it is often where we have friends over with kids. It's one of the first places they beeline to.
Whenever I would come home from school upset or sad, I would climb a tree that we have and just sit there and think about the day. And it would just always make me feel better, just hearing all the sounds and hearing the birds chirping and the wind.
The best time I've ever had back here in the yard is probably when we got to spend the night in the tree house, because we had dinner up there and we ate and then we slept up there, all four of us together.
I'd say it's a pretty safe bet. Most of us would like to get more use from our backyards and spend more time outside with our families. That is until that pesky mosquito shows up and those other nuisance bugs and it drives us right back inside. Now yes, there are sprays and other treatments that we could put on our skin and even to our backyards, but they're usually not very environmentally friendly. Well, here's a really cool way to take back your backyard with some serious style and keep it green at the same time. This project is a homemade mosquito and bug repellent tiki torch made with wine bottles. It's a great project for the whole family and only takes a few minutes to make. The star of the show, of course, is the wine bottle, and no doubt you have access to plenty of these, one way or another. You can find all the parts you need to make these torches at a home improvement store, and of course online. They include a nylon wick, a reducing connector that fits into the top of the bottle, thread sealant tape, also known as plumber's tape, small gravel such as pea gravel or aquarium gravel to partially fill the wine bottle, and of course the citronella oil. And have a funnel on hand for adding the gravel and certainly the oil. That's it. To start the project, the first step is optional but recommended, and that's to prep the wine bottle. If you want to leave the labels on, then at least rinse the bottle. But for a cleaner look, soak them in the sink with some warm soapy water for about an hour. With minimal effort, the labels should come off rather easily. It might require a soft brush though to get the remaining residue off, but overall, this part is surprisingly easy. Next, add the gravel. You have lots of options here. If you want the fastest way to get through this part of the process, then use smaller stones, like the kind you buy at the pet store that goes in the bottom of an aquarium. The gravel passes easily through the funnel without getting clogged. I found small bags of these stones at a dollar type store for $1 a bag, and each bag is the perfect amount of gravel per bottle. Larger stones, on the other hand, like pea gravel, they look great in the bottle but won't go through a funnel nearly as easily and tend to clog. I found the best way to add these to the bottle is by hand. While it's not hard, it just takes longer. Now it's time to prepare the connector that holds the wick for a snug fit. A common option for this is called a reducing connector that you can find wherever plumbing supplies are sold. You'll need a 3/4 to 1/2 inch male adapter. Each costs less than $2. To create the snug fit when you insert the reducing connector into the bottle, have some thread sealant tape on hand, also known as plumber's tape. Use it to wrap around the end of the adapter that goes into the bottle. Simply wrap that portion of the connector enough times to provide a good seal and a snug fit. Now fill each wine bottle with the citronella oil. That's your fuel for the torches, which produces that scent which repels those mosquitoes and other flying pests. The final step is to insert the connector into the bottle and then slip the wick down through the connector, so just a small amount is showing on the top end. Now you're ready to light your torches for a pest-free outing in style. Beyond the basics, if you're concerned about the bottle being knocked over and want to add a measure of safety, you can create various ways to provide added stability for that. And you can buy metal caps that attach to the bottle's neck for snuffing out the flame whenever you're through. The sky's the limit on what you can do. If you'd like the step-by-step instructions for making these wine bottle tiki torches, we'll have a link to Doug and Britt's blog post on this, as well as a lot more information about other creative projects you can do to make the most of your outdoor living space on our website at growingagreenerworld.com. Over the years since moving in and starting a family, Doug's personal landscape projects had been growing, but something else was growing as well, and Brittany saw it too.
I'll never forget the day I called him because he had created a space where I could spend time with the girls outside, and I stood in my window. I saw one swinging and one playing, and I said, thank you for creating this space that we can live in outside, that we can enjoy and have fun in, and have the girls and I can laugh in, and during the day while you're at work. And I think that's when he started really redeeming the space so that we could use it purposefully to bring life to our family, to entertain and bring others into that. And I think that's the turn where he really redeemed this ground at our house.
Redeeming your ground. It's a key phrase in Doug's story, but it means more than just making the most of your landscape. The word means to buy back, to regain possession, or to compensate for the faults of something. And that's exactly what Doug's done in his family's once neglected landscape.
So we'd been effectively redeeming our ground all around our house with all these things that said Scott. And a number of friends started to take notice and wanted me to do the same thing. It was around the same time that I was realizing that, yeah, I had a good job and I was making some good money doing it, and it provided comfort for my family, but man, it just didn't do it for me. And at the same time, we have these two young girls who are watching everything that we do, and we want them to do what they're created to do and what they're passionate about. And I certainly wasn't showing them in any way, shape, or form what that looked like. So I had a choice to make: stay in a great job in terms of making money, but not in terms of like bringing me life, and therefore not bringing my family life, or jump off, take a leap of faith to do what I feel like I'm gifted and called to do, to start Redeem Your Ground.
So when Doug approached me about this idea he had about taking what his passion was, possibly even leaving his job in the corporate world to pursue this 100%, I was receptive. I knew I had been prepared for a change in our family. I knew something was coming. I had been prepared for a big change, and I really felt like this was it. Like this was what our next step was.
And I wanted to be different though. I was going into landscape design differently than most other people. And my passions, I think, were very different. My passions were really about the family and their experiences outside. And what I found with other landscape design and architecture firms was they really focused on the what. They focused on the plants, and they focused on the fire pits, and they focused on the water features. But what people really wanted them to do is help them have an experience outside. And yes, have all those things, But those were all just things that would really kind of create the canvas on which they would have these amazing experiences. I like to say I like to focus on the why first, and the what then is actually kind of comes fairly easily once you figure out what that why is. Because the way that one family would want to redeem their ground, bring life to their family, is different than what another family would want to do.
Redeem Your Ground is now a full-blown exterior design studio, but it also encompasses a website that Doug and Brittany both contribute to with tons of ideas for improving your family, home, and garden. Whether it's Doug actually designing a landscape or Brittany's blog ideas on ways to get out and enjoy that yard more fully, the two have no shortage of ideas on how the average gardener can start redeeming their ground with just a little bit of effort.
One of the things that works well to tie spaces together, both functionally and visually, is to add meandering paths. Again, it gets you from point A to point B, but it also, when you're looking out your window, it allows you to kind of look to a specific spot. So again, meandering paths is a really cool thing to do. So one of the other ways in which you can make a space more harmonious is to use similar or the same plant material throughout your space. So you will find in my yard Gigi Gerbing azaleas in the foreground and the background and really throughout. And again, it just ties everything together. And then in front of that, you can layer in hostas and autumn ferns and Lenten roses, and we have a ton of different hydrangeas. I use mostly white. So again, I repeat that plant material throughout so that you feel like you're in one space, although you're walking through multiple spaces.
I just feel so grateful that I had a husband who had the vision to create this space so that we could have a place to gather as a family, to come and connect at home, that we could simplify and be here and give this gift to our kids.
But there are a lot of other people that I think needed to be encouraged to get outside. And again, the whole hope in that is to help people get outside, to have great experiences with friends and family. Again, as we've done with our house, to make our exterior spaces as much a part of our home as our interior spaces are.
This has been a really great opportunity for Doug and I to use our different gifts and our different skill sets to work together to pursue something that we both believe in. And together we're able to help other people create exactly what we have been able to find right here in our backyard and create spaces where they can find life, just like we did.
Leaving the safety zone of a steady paycheck can be a frightening proposition, especially for an endeavor as unpredictable and sometimes as fickle as gardening. I know because that's exactly what I did many years ago. And I have to say that Mother Nature is not your most accommodating coworker. But at the end of the day, there's no job more rewarding. I hope that Doug's story has inspired you to get outside and look for new opportunities to use those outdoor spaces and maybe even to start to redeem your own ground. Thanks for watching us, everybody. I'm Joe Lample, and we'll see you back here next time for more Growing a Greener World. I'm Joe Lample. When I created Growing a Greener World, I had one goal: to tell stories of everyday people, innovators, entrepreneurs, forward-thinking leaders who are all, in ways both big and small, dedicated to organic gardening and farming, lightening our footprint, conserving vital resources, protecting natural habitats, making a tangible difference for us all. They're real, they're passionate, they're all around us. They're the game changers who are literally growing a greener world and inspiring the rest of us to do the same. Growing a greener world, it's more than a movement, it's our mission.
As any gardener knows or quickly discovers, one size definitely does not fit all. The plants that thrive in the Pacific Northwest would melt in the heat of Florida, and the plants that do well in the humidity of the Southeast probably don't survive even a mild winter in the Midwest. But there's one region that's the biggest wild card of all. In the desert Southwest, one might think that no plants really thrive other than the occasional cactus. But the reality is, this part of the country boasts one of the most horticulturally diverse regions in the country, if you, as the gardener, can handle the extremes that Mother Nature throws at you. Today on Growing a Greener World, we go where we've never gone before to explore the unique beauty, challenges, and benefits of gardening in a place where the water is scarce, the soil is unforgiving, and the extreme heat is the only thing you can count on.
Desert. Just that one word brings to mind all sorts of iconic imagery. Parched cowboys riding across miles of sun-baked earth, dust-choked panoramas of endless rock and sand, broken only by a lone tumbleweed or a tall prickly saguaro bush straight out of a Hollywood prop closet. But there's a lot more to the desert Southwest than what you've seen in old westerns. North America's three major deserts, the Mojave, the Chihuahuan, and the Sonoran, occupy over 280,000 square miles of land that make up huge chunks of the states of California, Nevada, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. But far from the scorched wasteland usually depicted in the movies, the real desert Southwest is a thriving ecosystem all its own. And there are few places where that's more evident than the Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix. Brian Kissinger is the director of horticulture.
People ask me about the Sonoran Desert and the Desert Botanical Garden in particular. What is a Sonoran Desert? What's the sense of place here? It's a lower subtropical desert with some nights of frost in the winter, maybe 2 or 3, and summer temperatures that can be up close to 120, and everything in between. It's the lushest desert on the planet because we do get up to 12 inches of rain a year. The only thing is the rain comes in 2 times in that year. People don't realize that the deserts here there's multiple deserts. There's a lower desert, which is the most lush, diverse desert of all. There's an intermediate desert, which is higher oak pinon forest, and there's high desert, which is just, agaves and things that grow at higher elevation. As a kid, I really loved these plants. I mean, as an 8-year-old, I built a greenhouse with my dad. I collected cactus. I always thought I want to be near these really cool sculptural form plants. And actually to work with them in a landscape is challenging because they're so unique in shape and form to begin with, and how you put it all together, it takes an art form to really look at these plants and see how you combine their beauty. In the desert Southwest, people think that it's really hard to grow things, that everything is so harsh and that things just suffer, The reality is, if you learn the plant palette and you create the right environment, you can grow a lot of plants here. And I think if we duplicate that in our home gardens, you'll have real success here.
Brian has certainly achieved remarkable success with his own landscape. With a background in landscape design, he's transformed his own yard into a stunning example of just how lush and complex a desert landscape can be.
Brian, you talk a lot about shade as being one of the keys to success in gardening in the desert. And here we are in your beautiful personal landscape, and you have a lot of shade here. Talk to me about some of the ways that you use shade in this garden.
In planting this garden, it was really important to create the canopy first to give protection to all the plants I want to grow, like the cycads, the palms, the aloes below, and the lilies, because that afternoon sun from midday to late afternoon is crucial to have protection from that to grow these plants. It also helps them with transpiration of water, having the shade to protect them.
And everything in this garden is no older than 4 years, right?
Correct.
But without the protection of those trees first, you wouldn't have nearly the growth and the massing that you've got and how everything looks so lush right now. It's that critical, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think it's also important when you think about trees, creating the layers from top to bottom. Think of the trees that are going to be tallest, like 60 feet, to the mid-level trees, and that gives you this feeling of vertical gardening, which when you're walking through a small space, it's nice to be able to look up and see multiple layers.
So not only do you get the function and the protection of having those trees in place, but you get the verticality, which provides the aesthetics as well.
It makes it interesting.
Yeah. Brian, as I stand in this space and I look around, the word that comes to mind first is lush. From the ground covers up to the canopy trees. But you fill the space wherever the eye lands, and I love that. But let's start with the ground cover. And I think the first thing I want to clarify here is that I think it's fair to say that a lot of people think of ground cover as those plants that literally hug the ground and they always stay very low. But you have ground covers here that completely are not that at all. So tell me about some of the ones that you're using here.
Absolutely. The trailing rosemary is one I use because it does well in this climate. Now this is a sunny area where this is located, so it gets more light, but it creates a nice undulating, 12-inch to 18-inch tall, mounds of ground cover, which connects these plants together. You have a lot of accent plants in this bed, so that is a connectivity, that dark green that ties it together.
And then you look across the walkway, and then you have that wonderful drift of aloe. And it's just a completely different look, but it's also a ground cover.
Absolutely. So the aloe dorothea, the same thing. It's a swath or a drift of aloes that kind of pull your eye around that corner and send you on to the next, experience right there. Same thing with the cycads in that bed. They're wrapping around, taking you to the next, accent piece, which is, the palm with the cactus on it.
And there are so many great accent pieces in here. Do you have some favorites? I mean, how do you decide which ones of these do you really love more than the others?
Well, right now, it's the agave ovatifolia, because I love the color, the shape, and that powder blue and that strong form. And that's such a good contrast to everything else. And it really stands out amongst the greens.
Yeah.
Also, I love the Bismarck palm for the same reason. I love that powdery blue color, the strong fronds that plant has. And it's a plant from Madagascar that does really well here.
And you get great height against that stark vertical space there, so it really provides that.
Absolutely.
That softening of that.
Yep.
And then what is this right here hugging this palm?
That's an acanthus cirrus, and it gets these amazing giant white fragrant flowers here in late spring, early summer. And that thing will hug the base of that tree and climb up, and I'll kind of manage its growth into the crown of that palm tree. There's a lot of great aloes that stay small that we use a lot here now for ground covers. And the blue elf aloe, which is blooming right now, you can see makes a beautiful drift and is a great contrast to plants like rosemary and some of the other ground covers, like the portulacaria, which almost looks like a jade plant on the ground.
And of course the elephant in the room when it comes to gardening in the desert Southwest is the irrigation, lack of rainwater. But you have an incredibly diverse plant palette here, and I know that some of your plants are thirstier than others, and you do a smart irrigation plan with your drip and soaker for that. But what I really love is the fact that you're harvesting literally every drop of rain off your roof surface and directing it into these beds. So talk to me about that a little bit.
That whole rain garden concept, was brought to my attention, and I thought, what an opportunity when doing the grades and all the hardscape structures here to drain into the actual water beds, so that when we have a 1-inch rain, it's directed to these plants and they're actually going to get a deep soak from that.
And that's typically the monsoon season, which is just a short period of time during the year, but a lot of rain at once, usually.
Correct. That's when the winds come out of the south, and we have our thunderstorms build up in late June, July, and August.
So we're talking about making the most use of the rain when we get it, but when we're not, it's choosing the right kind of plants that don't require that supplemental irrigation. But if we do have those plants that need some extra watering, we do it in a smart way, and you've done that by zoning off your garden with good irrigation.
And take advantage of all the rainfall and keeping it on your property.
Which yours does. It doesn't leave your property at all, does it?
Nope.
But the Desert Botanical Garden's 140 acres isn't devoted only to showcasing and conserving plant varieties for display purposes. A huge part of their mission is to educate visitors, many of whom may be recent desert transplants themselves, how to duplicate this kind of gardening success at their own home in this part of the country.
I think the biggest challenge for people when they first come here in terms of gardening is learning our seasons, our seasonality. Seasonality works for us in a way that it works in no other area. Summer is almost our winter. You know, we stay inside as much as we can, the weather's extreme, our plants are under stress, and so right now coming out of that is really a sort of second spring for us in the fall. The temperature comes into a range that's amenable for a lot of growing. Our plants are starting to liven back up after a tough summer and get new growth. Flowers start coming out. It's really an exciting time for us when a lot of people are winding down in other parts of the country. Honestly, 9 months, maybe 8 months out of the year, we've got a beautiful climate to be outdoors, and the rest of it you just have to adapt. I think a lot of people assume that our soil, because it's not very organically rich, is sterile and that nothing can grow in it, and that's very much not the case. Our soil has a lot of micronutrients in it, a lot of minerals, and a lot of life. You know, it's got its own eco-web, and if we can take those micronutrients and combine them with more richer organic elements, and there's really a wide range of things we're capable of growing-wise here. It's a wonderful place to grow edibles. We can grow vegetables and food and fruit year-round. We start things like tomato season launches for us in December. That's when we start thinking about our tomatoes and growing them in a hothouse, preparing to take them out in February. So even in the middle of winter, we're kind of planning for spring.
Tracy, I love how you describe your summers in the desert like other people's winter. Not that it's cold, of course, here in the summer. We know that's not the case. But it's that time where temperatures are most extreme, and you have to do some pretty creative things to protect your plants, right?
Absolutely.
Talk about some of those things that you do, starting with the things in summer.
Okay, so in summer what we're doing obviously is looking to cut the intensity of the sun and heat that the plants receive, especially in the afternoon when they've already been through quite a day of stress. So how we achieve that is through the use of something called shade cloth, which is a woven or knit material that cuts the intensity of the sun by a certain percentage. In this case, probably this is about a 40% cloth, so it'll cut the sunlight by about 40% hitting the plant.
And that's about ideal for these conditions, right? But if you wanted more reduction in that intensity, you could have a tighter weave, and conversely, if you wanted less, they make this in a looser weave, right?
Absolutely, right. Because you do still want a certain amount of sunlight to reach the plant, and especially for our desert adapted plants. I mean, they want sun.
Yes.
They just don't want as much sun over such a period of intensity, and so that's what we're trying to correct for.
Right, they still need to photosynthesize.
Right.
Okay, let's talk about winter, because most of the plants that you have here are not typically hardy for extra cold conditions, but you can cheat that as well.
Correct. So in the wintertime, we're looking actually to contain heat and keep it with the plant overnight. So we use a shade cloth that's a light woven material that we drape over the plant to the ground to trap that heat that's coming up from the ground.
It's just enough protection to keep the frost off the foliage and then trap the heat, because that's important. You want that cloth to go all the way down to the ground and you anchor it around the base, correct?
Correct. It's very light and we drape it over the plant, and it is very important to get it all the way secured to the ground so that the heat radiating from the soil level will be trapped underneath that cloth.
And it's just enough protection to do the trick.
Just enough to get them through those few crucial hours.
No matter where you garden, it's all about the soil. And here in the desert Southwest, it's radically different than almost anywhere else. It has a high alkaline level and contains a lot of salt, and that can make it very inhospitable for many plants to thrive. But if you can learn to adapt and master growing in these conditions, you can have jaw-dropping results.
Just outside downtown Scottsdale, you'll find a veritable oasis. Welcome to Sing Farms, 20 acres of lush greenery and thriving plants that might make you completely forget you're in the desert. But if you think the beautiful gardens and immensely popular farmers market are what makes Sing Farm so extraordinary, just wait until you meet the man behind it all.
So the theory of this farm was not only to farm and go back to what my father taught me, was to find a piece of land that nobody knew what to do with. So we're able to take land that we think is discarded and bring it back, because Mother Earth is very powerful. It just needs what we took from it. My main goal was to make healthy soil. And this land being caliche, you really can't grow on it. It can't absorb water. There's no capillary action. There's no drainage. So the answer was compost. I went the first year and collected compost from 3-4 sources, brought it here, looked at it and go, nah, that's not compost. So really the journey became making my own organics. And that's what started where you saw on the back of the farm, is to make the soil healthy, I had to give it what was taken away from it. And what that's called is a soil food web. If you go in a forest, it takes about a year to make an inch of the undercover. But if you go by any major tree and dig down 5-6 inches, you will find the soil web. It'll be rich, it'll be full of microbes, high-fi fungi, and that's what feeds the tree. And my discussion to folks was what we discussed earlier. Have you ever been to a forest? And they go, yes. And I go, how beautiful was it? And they tell me. I go, okay, who trims the trees? Who fertilizes the trees? Who looks after it? And they go, Mr. Singh, nobody. I said, exactly. Nature already knows what to do for us. We're the ones that took it and bended it, molded it, made up products for marketing. It already knows what to do. So this farm, I decided to walk with nature. I put my hands in nature, and I did everything I could to be as compatible to nature to bring this soil alive. So I say if you enrich your soil with minerals, with kelp, worm castings, bat guano, compost, that diversity, all the selenium, boron, everything is then balanced, and then we consume the plant that grew from there. Now our bodies are balanced. I use a lot of things because diversity of soil is the only way to create high soluble sugars. I wanted to create that and show that in a desert, we can grow food 12 months a year. We can have diversity. We grow arugulas, we grow mustard, we grow beets, we grow carrots. Garlic grows like crazy here. I have trees, almond trees. And the idea is that diversity, again, gives us something that money can't buy. It's a matter of rolling up your sleeves and building soil. You will know when your soil is healthy. It will tell you. You'll go out there, you'll be smiling, the plants will be growing, and it's a matter of getting to that. I think it's the journey of getting to that is the excitement. And once you're there, it's like, wow. But it's actually getting there that's the journey, and most people don't want to put themselves through that. They should.
Water. It's literally the lifeblood of every garden, and it becomes even more of a commodity the scarcer it is. Every person we talked to in Arizona talked about how important it was to conserve it, and we should be trying to do that no matter where we live. But if you want the best tips on how to conserve it, there's no better place to come than where every drop is precious. One of the keys to a lush landscape is proper irrigation, without too much water, but just the right amount. And these days, having a drip irrigation system is one of the best ways to do that. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to set those systems up at home, because these days you can buy kits that have all the basic components to set this up at home. And the main parts are just the part that attaches to the faucet and a supply tube, half-inch supply tube, that runs out to the area where your beds or your plants are. And then you connect a 1/4-inch tubing. This is what I call spaghetti tubing, and you direct that right out to where your plants are. And then the final piece is an emitter, and an emitter will direct just the amount of water per hour to your plants. For example, this one will deliver 2 gallons per hour, but you can buy pieces that deliver 1 gallon per hour or even less. But your options are almost unlimited for fine-tuning your system. And then the last component that really puts your watering on autopilot is an automatic timer that's operated by a couple AA batteries. The price of this ranges from $25 to $50, but you can fine-tune this to get just the amount of water at just the right time for whatever your irrigation needs are.
The idea of an oasis is one of those classic desert stereotypes, a thriving pocket tucked into the middle of some unexpected place. But as you travel around the desert Southwest, you'll find more and more real-life examples. Agritopia is a 166-acre planned community in Gilbert, Arizona. But almost 60 years ago, it was just the Johnston family farm.
Basically, the key tenets of Agritopia are in the name proper. Agra, which is preserving urban agriculture. Topia, trying to create the best community that you can.
Now the very farm where Joe grew up is home to much more. Over 450 lots with single-family residences, cottages, a community center, a retirement home, restaurants, and at its center, a functioning urban farm with community garden.
A really good community includes agriculture anyhow, and in most cases in our area in suburbia, agriculture is just something that is turned under and turned into houses. So we wanted to preserve urban agriculture in a way that would work for the urban environment and also try to create a great community around it. But the seed of it was restaurant in our house serving the produce of the farm. That was the seed that it all sprouted from. One of the things we're really focusing on here is village life. And village life is something that you find around the world, in Japan, in Africa. You find it in the Midwest. The idea of a village where people of all ages and all stages live together, they're connected together by not being divided up by walls or product type or that sort of thing, but we're trying to create village life where people from all walks feel comfortable and get to know each other.
This idea of a planned community based around a real working farm has given rise to a fairly new term, agrihood, short for agricultural neighborhood. And if you haven't heard the word before, you will. It's estimated that as many as 200 agrihoods have popped up across the country over the past few years.
And typically in a village, the agriculture is around it, and the village is kind of in the middle. In this case, we've put it kind of in the center of the village since we're in kind of an urban fabric. But the point though is this, is that agriculture is super important in teaching life lessons, for one thing. It's important for people to know about seasons. It's important for people to understand that things take time, they take effort. Weeding is a problem. Weeding is a task. We need to weed things out of our own lives. We need to weed things out of the soil. So that all those life lessons and the confluence of interest, particularly by younger folks in where their food comes from, makes the idea of an agrihood where it's a village, nothing new, but it takes patience, and it also takes someone who is keen on the stewardship of the land, that's willing to work 10, 15 years on getting it right.
And Agritopia is getting it right, all the way down to the smaller scale community garden. Here, residents who come from around the country and even the world to now call Agritopia home are trying their hand at growing their own food. Some bring years of experience. Some have never planted a thing, but they're all learning together, and that's an important part of the journey. The desert Southwest is probably the last place you think of for lush gardens, but it's really where all the gardening rules come together. Building the soil, treating water as a precious resource, working with Mother Nature no matter what she throws at you, building community and sharing the bounty. And it's certainly been an inspiration for me, and I can't wait to get back to the garden farm to put these practices into play. And I hope it's been an inspiration for you too. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I'm Joe Lampel, and we'll see you back here next time for more Growing a Greener World.